Hey everyone, James from TeaDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. So today I'm going to be talking about a vendor, Yeon Tea, based in Hong Kong, that I have just become aware of in 2021, that their tea is available, which is kind of exciting because they sell one of the big categories of tea that I really think is not only underrepresented but extremely underrepresented in the Western sphere. So I am excited to talk a little bit about some of their teas, what they might offer, and that type of tea is traditionally stored tea, which I am a fan of and liked enough to include it in sort of the big categories of tea. Also, you might notice I have a new microphone, trying out a new setup here, so we'll see how this works. As far as audio, I'm still recording audio in my phone too, so if it doesn't work out well, then there will just be this kind of weird microphone in front of me during this episode. So let me know if you find the microphone distracting or whatever. This is not a show about aesthetics, so I'm not too bothered by it here. But if you are, let me know, and I will take that into consideration. Okay, so traditionally stored tea, I think probably the best source of information on here is checking out Marshall N's website. So that's marshalln.com, and clicking on the traditional storage tag. He's written a lot about this type of tea over the years. And it's not exactly the same thing as just wet stored tea. And if you've tasted tea stored in Guangdong, or even Hong Kong or Taiwan, it's not necessarily the same thing. So it's a process that they basically go into ground, very, very humid storage for a few years, and then they get dried out over time. And that process of drying out can vary, taking anywhere from 5 or 6 years to, I don't know, longer, shorter. I'm not really sure. But it's a type of tea that really isn't covered at all in the West. And I sort of had a very atypical introduction to this, and I think I was kind of lucky in a way to be introduced to this really quite early in sort of my tea drinking experience. And that's through a vendor called Origin Tea, who has unfortunately not been around for a long time now. But they sold tea in Taiwan. They were based there, but they also had a decent selection of traditionally stored tea. And so through that, I was able to really sample and get a feeling for it in a way that I really don't think is available now. And one of the big advantages, I think, for a place like Yeon is that they're able to sell some of these teas for not too much money. A place like Teas We Like has sold a couple pretty decent traditionally stored teas over the time, but because they don't offer samples, and their tea also tends to be a little more pricey. So, good introductions, but not everyone can necessarily just dump $150, $200 onto a cake as a blind buy, and especially something like traditionally stored tea where you're really not sure about it. So today I'm going to be talking about two teas that are both around 10 cents a gram or cheaper. So these are not break your bank sorts of teas, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about them. So let's go. First up, we're going to be talking about the 2008 Taste of Hong Kong cake right here. And I will heat up the kettle and brew some tea. Okay, so here we go. So this is, I think, 240, 250 Hong Kong dollars. It comes down to around $30, something around that, maybe slightly more. It's a 380 gram cake, so it's a big cake. So really, this is not an expensive tea. You may have to pay a bit for shipping from Hong Kong, but this is not too pricey. So I was happy to spring for it. And look at that color. That is already a reddish color. And you'll notice I am brewing this in the pot that I normally am doing my ripes in the morning with my wife. So an interesting comparison, and a thing to think about with these teas is just ripe. When I was describing the process earlier of basically storing the tea in very intense conditions for a while, and then airing it out and drying it out, it's a process that's not totally different from ripe. I'm not going to say that it's the same thing, and I in fact think they result in fairly different products, but you'll see that this is producing a red soup for something that's only 13 years old. And it's also really does have that sort of like really earthy, somewhat musty smell. So this is a tea that a type of tea that I think is worth trying, and I'm almost certain that not everyone is going to like this type of tea, which is one reason I do like this, because the barrier to entry is low. The drawback to that, of course, is that maybe you're not having the right example. Maybe it's possible that you might like a better traditionally stored tea. But I think in lieu of just not having a ton of alternates, I think this tea is probably really worth trying for those that want to just sort of explore this category of tea. There's so many different young shungs that are available that it's really just a damn shame that we that a single example of traditionally stored shung is worth shouting out and talking about. Because I don't think this tea is amazing, to be clear. But I think for the price, it's interesting. So check that out. Really beautiful color there. So I am using about 9 grams. My wife likes these sorts of teas, and she didn't complain about it. A couple mornings that I've served this, I've asked her about it. She's like, yeah, it's fine. So not necessarily a standout, but it's not something where it's like, ugh, gross. So I think you'll find your mileage might vary with that. So here, cheers. So really heavy wood, beatiness, like really gives off that fungal, mushroomy aroma to it. This is also notably a raw tea. Going to be talking about a traditionally stored ripe in the latter part of this. So this tea is it's not that sweet. It's not necessarily bitter, but I do think you might be able to get some bite and bitterness to it if you really, really pushed it. Yeah, I think it's mainly interesting just to see how it can get this certain profile from really just not a ton of time. Body's okay. Aftertaste is similarly not anything super crazy to write home about. So yeah, this is tea I think is one that could be a good daily drinker if you really, really love the profile. And I think one thing that is also worth noting is when I bought this tea, and I bought this tea with my friend Garrett, we both picked up a cake, is I requested that he put the tea in a Mylar bag with a hygrometer, just to measure the generated relative humidity. You would think a tea coming from Hong Kong might register quite highly on the generated relative humidity, especially a tea that's brewing this sort of color. But in evidence of just sort of the sometimes counterintuitive nature of these teas, this tea measured only 41 generated relative humidity, which is really quite low and means that it's going to be actually rehumidifying here. Now, part of that could be because of the international shipping. That being said, it shipped over here in 10 or 11 days, so it's not like it was stuck on a slow boat, and who knows what kind of conditions it was stored in there. So it shipped here relatively fast, and it shows you also that they're probably keeping it in relatively dryish conditions in Hong Kong too. So the thing that gives me a little more hope for this tea that it might improve, and I don't hate it. I think it's fine. I think this is a tea I can drink through pretty easily with my wife, just because of the nature in which I drink ripe or ripe adjacent teas, is that I might be able to rehumidify it by putting it, I mean, heck, it could even rehumidify in my current conditions here, where I'm regularly registering in the 50s, but more likely I'll put it in one of my Pumadors. I'll forget about it for 3 or 4 months, and I will revisit it then sometime during the summer, and we'll see how it is. I think there's a decent chance that it might pick up a little bit more and become a little more vibrant. So, yeah, so, you know, it's a little counterintuitive because you'd think these teas are super dank, so it's better to expose it to a lot of air or whatever, but at the same time, I think pu'erh tea tastes better when it's stored at a certain humidity. I think this tea is probably a little too dry. So I keep blabbering around. Let's have another steep. Woody, a little thin, really not very sweet at all. In fact, this one kind of has that sharp bitterness to it. Definitely can taste that it's a raw tea. So it hasn't totally lost all of that. This is not a terribly mellow tea. considering the color it's brewing especially. And yeah, all right, so that's that. And now I'm going to be bringing on a loose ripe tea from them. And for me, this is something that really hits the spot for me and can really fit into my daily rotation of ripe drinking in a very casual setting, and is also not very expensive. So let's get on to that. Okay, so I am brewing what they call the Best Taste Ripe Pu'erh. It comes loose, comes in a little bag that they send you. One thing I noticed in the few trips I've gone to Hong Kong is a lot of these tea houses do have their sort of like own house blends of loose. Tends to be a little cheaper, and I am kind of a fan of them as far as just sort of the daily drinking goes. I think they're not intended for collection or anything like that, so you don't need to worry about those aspects of it, and they're just sort of blended together. I read the description of this. It just sort of describes it as a blend of cakes and loose material together, and traditionally stored ripe. I'm not even sure what category to put that in. I don't want to create another category for that. But it's a type of tea that really is worth trying because it's interesting. And it's probably the one way that you really can see ripe develop in interesting ways. Other than that, it's like, I don't know that you're going to have terrible evolution of ripe tea. If you take just sort of a standard ripe and store it just sort of standardly in sort of like a Kunming or Guangzhou situation. So this type of storage really does result in pretty interesting and, for me, extremely drinkable tea. So while the Taste of Hong Kong is probably not something I'm going to be ordering again, unless it really, really picks up, this is a tea that, and this sort of tea is the stuff that I would love to drink on the regular. You can see I'm brewing it in a gaiwan here, but that's just because I had this pot occupied. I'd normally be drinking this sort of tea in here. And the leaves are pretty much pitch black. Has a really creamy, what I've seen these teas described as very like Chinese medicine, very ginseng-like aroma. Definitely get some of that there. It's quite unique. And cheers. So, really soft body, especially compared to the Taste of Hong Kong. A lot of creaminess, quite sweet as well. Makes me want dim sum. Alright, and probably not going to be a super long-lasting tea, but that's fine. This tea costs about 10 cents a gram. I just looked it up right beforehand, so really, really quite an affordable price. I was brewing it a little bit earlier in the day, so this is probably like 7 or 8 infusions in. Cheers. Yeah, so it's just a really, really easygoing taste to me, and given that there's just not a whole lot of options for traditionally stored tea, I think I will be probably ordering some more of this just to be drinking pretty regular. It's nice to have something to mix up the, fairly normie like Dai or Yunnan sourcing ripe cakes that I'm drinking through. So definitely looking forward to having more of this around. Like the Taste of Hong Kong, I think this is a tea that will be coming back onto a show, and I'll probably review it more normally, just like I would other stuff. Maybe share a few more thoughts on traditionally stored ripe, especially now that I'm able to access it. And it's the type of tea that I've been missing. I bought a bit of that, a bit of traditionally stored ripe loose blend when I was in Hong Kong the last time, and I finished it a long time ago. So that was 4 years ago at this point. So yeah, I am looking forward to having some more that I can just access really regularly. So definitely recommend you try both of these teas. So if you do order from Yi'an, make sure you try some traditionally stored raw, such as the Taste of Hong Kong. You can also peruse through their catalog. They have a number of samples and that sort of thing, as well as the traditionally stored ripe. This, as well as the purple Munghai cake, which I think is a raw ripe blend. They're both pretty good. So I will wholeheartedly recommend people check these out. In fact, I kind of think that these traditionally stored ripes might be more accessible than the raw to some extent. But certainly try both. Yeah. Even a hint of like sort of like really aged medicinal fruits into this too. So really enjoying this tea, and I think that just about wraps up this episode. You can see I'm going to keep drinking this, so thank you all for tuning in. Let me know how you like the episode. Let me know how you like the new setup. Does the audio sound good to you? I'm of course going to edit it and not just release this totally unchecked, but you might be able to pick up on some things that I don't. Is this mic really distracting right here? So yeah, let me know. Cheers.